the only civilian to get a Bronze Star. I salute you again. Anyway, that observation from Joe was very truly special and for me very unforgettable. And I read for the first time Marion Faye Novak's Lonely Girls with Burning Eyes. Marion, I was so touched. I got teary-eyed. I cried. When you talked about Danny Peterson, our Navy Cross awardee, who, like your husband Dave and I, we were in the basic school company and platoon together. You changed the names of the others in the book, but you left Danny's as is. We all took his death very hard. You really brought home for me and today what it was like for our wives and our loved ones, and how you were treated by your family and by others. Thank you very much. I also read John Lawrence's The Cat from Hue, a Vietnam War story. On the book cover it says, one of the finest of its genre, comparable to Michael Herr's Dispatches. Maybe comparable, but John's book was much better and a lot longer. John had 3 tours, I think, as a CBS News correspondent in Vietnam. Lawrence had a real respect for the frontline soldier and Marine. They were all not dumb and crazed killers like some others have tried to depict. And also comments about field grade leaders. They weren't all fools looking for promotion. They were some special people. Other books have tried to say it differently. By the way, speaking of books, today I'm followed by Jim McGinney, my classmate, who wrote a novel, Born to Kill, A Brooklyn Tale. It's fun, it's a great read, and go buy it because Jim and Pat need the money. Well, he doesn't, but... This morning's theme is about letters home and letters from home. I was not married prior to Vietnam. My mother wouldn't let me. She was very fearful that my future wife, Carol, a wife of 47 years, would be a widow. After learning about one of the conference themes, I checked with Carol and also with my sisters about my letters home. They remembered that I never talked about what was happening or what had happened. Occasionally, I would tell them where I was, and most of the time that was lies. Con Tien was in the news too much to let them know that I was there. I didn't have a male relative to write to, so I don't know if it would have been different. It might have been. But likewise, letters back from them never really talked about what was happening back here. I was naive about all that. I didn't care until much later. Memories and knowledge, then and now. What did I or we know about the war then versus about what we learned later after coming home and as the years progressed? There was an awful lot that we did not know about what was happening throughout Vietnam and other units. Our knowledge seemed to be limited to the battalion and the area that we were operating in. Did not really know what other units were doing. Stars and Stripes when we got it, and the Armed Forces Radio Network didn't help. Usually I just use that to look for casualty lists, and lists in the message traffic that came through. We later learned that Stars and Stripes just tended to tell us what McAfee wanted us and others to know. To highlight this, I want to read several passages from John Lawrence's book, The Cat from Hue. Many parts of John's book had a big impact on me as it helped me realize and gave words to how I felt, perhaps later on, as to what was really happening. The only news most of the troops had heard was broadcast on the Armed Forces Radio Network. Announcers quoted U.S. officials in Saigon saying the battle for Hue was no more than a mopping up operation and would be over in a few days. The few days had become weeks. Officials had been making the same predictions since early February, and the story was getting tired. As tired as the official claim a few months earlier that the VC and North Vietnamese were too badly hurt to launch a major offensive. The Marines had been mopping up in Hue for more than 3 weeks. Thousands of people were dead, and some of the stories making it back to Da Nang by word of mouth were as ghastly as anyone had ever heard in Vietnam. The information was not broadcast on Armed Forces Radio Network. How could they talk about a cold-hearted killing of a prisoner, or the torture of a civilian, or the sad face of a young man in combat fatigues, or the fading strength of the Marines on the line? The true facts of what was going on in Hue or anywhere else were not broadcast on Armed Forces Radio Network. In the bubble of unreality that surrounded the daily war news, the farther away you were from the front lines, the less you knew about what was actually going on. Men like Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara, and William Westmoreland, who were the farthest away from the front line, consequently knew the least about the reality of the war. They were the very ones who were planning the strategy to fight it. What was the truth about how the war was going? Once again, it seemed to be unit specific. We knew that we knew what we were doing, right? And we cared about what was happening to us. I mean, our losses were the guys that we knew. Maybe we didn't know why we were doing what we were doing, but we did it. We were operating in a survival mode for ourselves, for our buddies, for our Marines. I guess I knew that something wasn't right. Working along the DMZ, I started my tour in Jialin. I ended in Can Tien. We're part of building McNamara's Wall, the Trace, the Strip. Building a tower during the day that the NVA burned down at night. Getting fired at every day when we walked outside the wire. All the heavy losses. Was this what winning was like? Again from John Lawrence, I'd like to read another passage that has meaning to me. The first casualty of the Vietnam War was truth. The official remarks of American officers and diplomats who kept reporting progress in the war were often inaccurate or misleading. They had been seeing gains and denying failure for so long, for so many years, that thoughtful reporters no longer believed what was said. Each new claim of progress was now met with suspicion. The whole information system was deeply flawed. As I was beginning to learn, high-ranking American officials saw progress where their field officers saw failure. Critical reports sent by subordinates in the countryside were rewritten to fit official Washington, Saigon line, or in some cases, suppressed. Even the brightest State Department and CIA officers who worked hard to gather information with a high degree of accuracy and insight were divided about what was going on. Saigon-based senior officials dismissed reports of failure from the field because it did not reflect the prevailing analysis that the war was being won. Subordinates were getting too close to the action, they were going native. Another reason for faulty reporting was that the Vietnamese routinely lied to their American counterparts. South Vietnamese officials usually told their allies what they thought they wanted to hear, since the Americans wanted to hear that progress was being made. And that was what they were told. It made life easier. Many of my feelings about the war were formed much later by what I learned, read about, and experienced. In the summer of 2014, I got a call from one of my old Marines in Vietnam, Lance Corporal John Quinn. Remember me? I didn't, but yeah. But it all started to come back to me, and I did remember him once he began talking about an action that Bravo 14 had west of Camp Evans on October the 27th, 1967. A date like Frank's date. Never forget it. And the days right after that. We were ambushed, which MACV insisted on calling a meeting action. Bravo lost 14 KIAs, plus a bunch, 31 wounded, including Captain Ross, the company CO. I was the company XO back at Camp Evans and flew that afternoon out to the field to take over Bravo. Based on what I was told by some of my old troops that evening, Lance Corporal Quinn, as well as others, should be written up for a Valor Award. When I talked to John that next morning, he refused. Apparently, out of a sense of survivor's guilt over the loss of so many friends, he did not want his Purple Heart, he refused to go to the battalion doctor the next morning, and he did not want a Silver Star. 47 years later, undergoing PTSD treatment by his doctor therapist, thought that he could have closure if he had the medals. Well, it's a very long story about helping to build a congressional awards package, especially after the congressman's office screwed it up. I'll tell you what his name was a little bit later if anybody wants to know. So I took the package, rewrote it myself, and submitted it to the awards branch, and still today is being processed and reviewed by the awards branch for potential award of a Valor Award and a Purple Heart. I've always had a problem remembering about specific actions, people, and places, but building this awards citation package for one of my old Marines brought back many memories. I had conversations with several of the eyewitnesses that day, including my platoon radio operator, Tom Jacobs, a very successful restaurateur in Denver. After reading and studying the command chronologies of those hours and days, it's produced many reflections, thoughts, self-doubts, dreams, and nightmares as I was completing the awards package. I was surprised about how much came back to me that I had previously forgotten. After seeing the guys that we had lost in the LZ and body bags that next day, I suppose it might have been the real start of me wondering about and questioning the conduct and the value of the war. After losing friends and troops, protecting my guys, and at the same time, payback became a big deal for us. After coming home to Camp Lejeune, drinking each night in the O Club with 5 other guys that just came back, realizing that I could not keep on doing this, getting a buzz on every night, and up at 5:30 to go do duty, I went to Sears and bought a small TV and became a Cokeaholic, cans of Coke. I had 4 cans of Coke a night watching TV just to avoid going back to the bar. Several months later, I got married, moved to Terra Terrace, went on a Caribbean cruise, the Navy Marine Corps type, drinking a lot of rum, and coming home to my wife, I realized that I wanted to find out what the non-FMF Marine Corps was all about. So I applied for and accepted an assistant instructor job back in my home state of Michigan. I knew that I would also be doing casualty affairs calls, but not really think about it. So off to Flint we went for a period of June 69 through November 1970. Our reception in Flint, Michigan, a blue-collar automobile factory town, was very supportive and friendly. Many afternoons, after posing an admin watch at the Reserve Center, just 5 minutes away, the I&I staff hung out at the Diamond Bar on Saginaw Street with all the blue collars. Some of them were not too keen of me being a lieutenant. I heard stories from everybody about their lieutenant, all right? But anyway, once I made captain, I was okay. I don't remember spending much for drinks because they always bought our drinks. Casualty calls. Towards the end of General Moore and Joe Galloway's book, they talk about the early casualty notification process in 1965 with yellow cab drivers at all hours of the day and night delivering telegrams, and how bad it was, especially with all the large number of casualties from Idrang Valley in 65, and their families back at Fort Benning. Shortly thereafter, the military services had a new policy requiring an officer to make the notification. At the start of the tour, I had a very hard time finding someone from the I&I staff to go with me on calls. I probably had a minister or a priest with me 5 or 6 times, but unless a Marine was Catholic or in a small town, it was really tough to find the family minister. The I&I staff. First Sergeant McNutt, God love him, he couldn't control his emotions very well, and he always broke down in the home. He says, Captain, I can't do anymore. Doc Akers, our I&I corpsman, was the same way, and he was a very large man in a Navy uniform. Staff Sergeant League was our only black on staff, and he was called up on several times for the minority black calls, casualty calls in Flint. Major Slater, John Slater, a true hero, did calls before I arrived and never wanted to do another. I understood later on why. Eventually, I fortunately settled on a young sergeant, our armorer, who looked like the boy next door. At that time, I was told that I did. Generally, we were well received and accepted by most of the families. We had a few times where brothers and uncles got really belligerent towards us. To them, the sergeant and I, we were the Marine Corps. And standing in their homes, we were. I only had a few wounded notifications. Once a mother, a very large Hispanic woman, saw the green car out front and came running across the lawn, screaming and hollering in Spanish. I broke protocol and hollered back, "He's only wounded, he's only wounded." And I don't know if she understood or not. I had 45 casualty calls in 18 months. It did not get easier. It got much harder as I was changing and having a harder time dealing with these families' losses. The families, I met the best of America. I also met the worst. Some young wives had already moved on with boyfriends, but sadly, they still got the insurance money. At times, there were immediate questions about the money they were to get before the body even came home. But that was the exception. Many talked about their son, what he believed in, the cause that he died for, the buddies that he died for. Most wanted more detail than I had, especially in some friendly fire cases. They were challenging to handle. Later on, some of these families established community and school awards for their sons. One family bought a new farmhouse with the insurance money. My feelings, attitude, and outlook on the war was also changing. It became harder and harder to accept and deal with seeing these families suffer so much. I just wanted all to come home and to stop the loss of these young lives. I was due to get off of active duty in November 1970. I had applied for augmentation, but the augmentation board was not going to report out until December. But we found out that I was accepted for augmentation. So I had to make a decision, stay in or get out. To continue doing casualty affairs work for another 6 months, and then likely go back to Vietnam, which, as I'm sure most of you know or will understand, despite my feelings about the war, all right, I was very willing to do that. Most of you that did second tours and more. The Sunday before the Wednesday that I was due to get out, my EAS date, I got a call at home from Kansas City which was the 9th Marine Corps District Casualty Affairs Office. Captain Morgan, we got one for you. That call and the notification visit that I made that afternoon made up my mind, and I left active duty that next Wednesday. I love my Marines. I love being a Marine, but at the time, I couldn't do another casualty call. It has been my honor to be part of the Norman Lane Jr. Memorial Project Symposium in honor of Norman, Steve Joyner, Danny Peterson, and all of the 47 classmates we lost. Thank you.